That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Humans have to eat. This is not a secret. It doesn't matter whether they're on Earth or not. But have you ever wondered what astronauts eat in space? Well, if you have, now we're gonna have the answers. Let's start with a brief timeline of astronaut food. The main source for this video is the article written by Michelle Perchonok and Charles Bourland with the title NASA: Food Systems Past, Present and Future. First human to ever go into space was the Russian astronaut Yuri Gagarin in 1961. The flight lasted only about 108 minutes, but Gagarin had with him squeezed tubes with pureed meat and chocolate sauce. Well, let's start with the Project Mercury in 1961, which lasted until 1963. The first US astronaut to eat in space was John Glenn, who ate applesauce from an aluminum tube, which was similar to toothpaste tubes in 1962, during the third Mercury mission. The package design served pretty well the requirements and didn't allow any food contamination in the cabin. But this way of eating has its own cons. Because the consumer couldn't see or smell the food while eating, they couldn't know what it would taste like, what it would feel. Furthermore, the texture of the food was limited to the orifice of the tube and the tube filling process. There were also cubed foods, which were bite-sized, high-calorie mixtures of protein, high melting point fat, sugar, and fruits or nuts. The problem with those foods were similar to the foods in tubes. The engineered cubes didn't have a familiar texture and mouthfeel compared to other products.
That's fucking disgusting.
Freeze-dried powders were also made, but because of the difficulty of the hydration and the formation of crumbs, they could fall in instruments. Food research and development emphasis during the Mercury period was calorie-dense, nutritious, and palatable food. Because the missions were of short duration, no provisions were made for specific food storage aboard the spacecraft. So crews continued to eat bite-sized cubes or squeezed food from tubes, and even though the food actually met the description of acceptability in ground-based tests, the consumption in flights were still inadequate and astronauts kept losing weight. A food system including formulations and packaging was designed for the Gemini project. So let's head now into the famous Apollo from 1962 through 1972. The Apollo food system was very similar to the Gemini food system. However, by the later Apollo missions, an increased variety and improved quality became very important design factors for their food system. As the missions became longer, it was more important that the crew would have the opportunity to eat, let's say, proper food. Because after all, unless the food is consumed, the nutrition provided by it is totally useless. In addition, people like and prefer to have variety in their diets, isn't it? The food system of the later Apollo missions was improved to include the use of retort pouches and cans. Retorting thermally sterilizes the food, resulting in a product that can be stored at ambient temperatures for a longer period. Apollo astronauts were the first to have hot water, which made rehydrating foods easier and improved their taste. It was also at this point in time that the crew first began to eat from open containers with utensils. The use of a spoon began with Apollo 8, when flexible packaged thermo-sterilized foods were added to the menu. The Apollo astronauts also were the first to use irradiated food in space. It was designed to be used inside their suits for consumption without using their hands. The packaged bar fit into a sleeve which the astronauts could reach with their mouths and bite off portions of it. The fruit bar was made from compressed fruit leather and packaged with an edible starch film. Despite improvement and advances in the in-flight food system over those used in the previous years, the majority of Apollo astronauts did not consume sufficient nutrients.
So it became quite apparent that adequate nutrition begins with appropriate food presented to the consumer in a familiar form. From 1973 to 1974, we had Skylab, which had the most palatable and variety food system to be used in space up to that date. There were 72 types of food to choose from, with a 6-day menu cycle. Skylab was the first US space mission to have freezers, refrigerators, and food warmers. From the onboard freezers, the crew were able to have a variety of foods such as ice cream, filet mignon, and lobster. And from the refrigerator, they had chilled beverages and desserts. Added to the conventional knife, fork, and spoon was a pair of scissors for cutting open plastic seals. Unlike previous space vehicles, Skylab actually featured a large interior area where space was actually available for the dining room and a table. So eating for Skylab's 3-member teams was a fairly normal operation, with footholds to allow them to situate themselves around the table and sit to eat. The dining table had built-in food heaters with timers for advanced preparation of food. As a result, the Skylab astronauts maintained the best recorded nutrition intake to date for US astronauts. Let's talk now about today and the future. It is well known that there are over 200 different menus available on the ISS, aka the International Space Station. Well, it might not be well known, but it's well documented. So, for the NASA, the next step is to plan for a tripulated mission to go to Mars and come back to Earth, which will take around 2.5 to 3 years. Considering Mars is 225 kilometers away from Earth, and that will for sure put some extra efforts for the astronauts, including some issues with food, as you can imagine. Supplying a food package for a 3-year mission in Mars entails a huge cost to launch the food into orbit. Estimates are that with 1.8 kg of food per person per day, about 12 metric tons are needed for a 3-year trip with a 6-man crew. With a launch in the cost of the region of $15,000 per kilogram, the overall cost would be around $180 million for the food itself. There's also concerns about unknown radiation levels during the flight that may cause chemical reaction in the food that will adversely affect its nutritional and or sensorial properties and make the food nutrient deficient and or inedible. As an alternative, it has been proposed that astronauts could grow some of their food during the journey to Mars to supplement a smaller payload of prepackaged food. In this case, you might want to call Matt Damon, just in case you get lost in Mars. So what about astronauts and their weight? You might have heard they lose some of their time in space. It is so common for astronauts to lose weight during a spaceflight that they even created a term for this. It is called space anorexia.